Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome. This is Congressman Scott Perry. And this evening, I'd like to just welcome you to this teletown hall. And while we're waiting for more callers to get on. And also, we want to give you an opportunity to think about your questions and get in the queue. So I'm going to chat just a little bit about what's been going on and what probably will happen in Washington over the next few weeks. But before we get too far down the line, I want you to note that you can press *3 to ask a question. That's *3 on your phone to ask a question and get in the queue. Of course, you can press *6 to subscribe to the newsletter. But for the purposes of this evening's call, *3 to get in the queue and ask a question. So as I'm around our district, which includes, of course, includes all of Dauphin County, roughly half of York County, and a little more than half of Cumberland County, I hear a couple pretty resounding but general themes. Folks are struggling to pay their bills. Everything's expensive, and they want to know, why that's happened, why that is that way. And quite honestly, watching the news, if most people do, they're concerned about what they see at the border. It kind of started out as a southern border, but now it includes the northern border, but it's just kind of border security in general and national security that is connected to a wide, what I would consider, and I do consider, a wide open border. Since the Biden administration has been in office, we're estimating 8 million people have come illegally across the border. Now, I say I'm estimating, I do use the Department of Homeland Security's numbers on that, but even those numbers are an estimate, and they also likely don't include the known gotaways or those are folks that they saw but never apprehended, and or the unknown gotaways. So that's a huge number, and of course, we have set records month after month after month, and people are demanding something be done about that. So on those two fronts, and since I'm on the border, I'll kind of stick with that. Last year, we passed a bill that we know as H.R. 2, House Resolution 2, which in my opinion is the most comprehensive border security bill ever passed by Congress. And it took months and months of work. We considered a lot of different options, but suffice it to say, I think that America can secure its border and do so humanely, and understand as well that America, unlike almost every other country in the world, is the most generous of all countries in the world. And we allow over 1 million people to come legally to our country every single year. So the numbers that I was talking about earlier, the 8 million, are on top of the numbers of people that come here legally and follow the process and follow the law every single year. So we passed this bill, H.R. 2, regarding border security, and we sent it to the Senate, and it sits there. Now, it's not my first day in the House of Representatives. I'm sure the Senate has some different ideas, and if they don't like our bill, they can certainly pass a bill over there and send it over our way, and we can maybe work out some differences between the two. They have waited up until essentially last month to do that, and their bill would allow about 1.5 million people to come illegally across the border every single year, 5,000 a day minimum, before any controls kick in. And that's just one of the aspects of that bill, that offering out of the Senate, which doesn't seem like it's really, well, it's not, in my opinion. It's not fixing anything. It's enshrining lawlessness and essentially a wide open border at that level in law. So that never made it out of the Senate. So that's where that stands. As long as we're still continuing to discuss the border, and I want to remind everybody to press *3 to ask a question and get in the queue. Along with that, we've been watching the Biden administration with the Homeland Security Secretary, Alejandro Mayorkas, quite honestly, facilitate a wide open border. And let me put some meat on the bones there so you don't think I'm just, it's not just talking points or what have you. The Border Patrol has now offered a thing called the CBP-1 app, Customs and Border Patrol 1, application on telephones. And that CBP-1 app is used by people and migrants or illegal foreign nationals, as I often call them. They use that to determine what is the best place to come across the border every day, and our government is providing that. The cartels also use that, and so do non-governmental organizations that use taxpayer dollars. They also use that to facilitate the passage of illegal foreign nationals across our border. That is subverting the law that is on the books. That is subverting what many people, myself included, would consider a secure border and national security. For that reason and many, many others, and I'll say 8 million others, I voted in favor of the impeachment of the Secretary of Homeland Security. I thought he had earned it, and unfortunately, it's one of the only tools of accountability that the legislature has. So, on the other front, on the cost of living of things, the federal government is directly responsible for much of the rise in cost of living, and I've harped on it ever since I was elected. One of the reasons I wanted to go to Washington, D.C. is to get our fiscal house in order. So one of the first bills I offered then, and it remains a bill that I offer every single term when I can, when it starts, is the balanced budget amendment. But I can't convince my colleagues to take that up or vote for it. So what I did last spring, if you remember, when Speaker McCarthy wasn't Speaker but wanted to be Speaker, among one of the things that I and some of my colleagues demanded of him was to stop spending so much money. We take in $4 trillion at the federal level in revenue, but we're spending $7.2 trillion. And what that does is that puts a lot of unaccounted for, I'll characterize it that way, or unbacked up, there's nothing to back it up, cash out there. Understand this is money that's just printed or we're borrowing, and it puts it out there in the economy. And what happens is there's too much money chasing too few goods, which means the law of supply and demand simply kick in, and the goods then cost more because people can get more for them because there's all this money floating around. And we tried to reduce that amount of money. Now, we got him to agree to that last January, but by May, he had kind of abandoned the deal on the debt ceiling negotiations. And since that time, he agreed to spend $4 trillion more over the course of the remainder of the Biden presidency. The $4 trillion additional. And what that caused is we just went over $34 trillion between December and January, just a month and a half ago. And by May, we will be at $35 trillion. And the Fed is trying to cool the economy off. And their methodology to cool the economy off is to raise interest rates. And now the federal government will pay $1 trillion for the first time ever this fiscal year in interest alone, which eclipses our whole defense budget. It's not a recipe for success, in my opinion. And I think we've got to get our fiscal house in order, and we've got to get closer to spending the revenue that we take in. I want to encourage everybody to press *3 if they have a question. I did want to ask you to take a poll while you're waiting online. I'd like to get your thoughts on a quick poll. Do you believe that the President Biden, is adequately addressing the crisis at the southern border? Press 1 for yes and 2 for no. 1 for yes, 2 for no on the poll while you're in the queue there. And with that, I want to turn to Richard in Mount Wolf, who's on the line, and I want to hear I don't know what his question may be, but I'd like to hear what his question is.
Congressman Perry, Richard Eicher, constituent, Mount Wolf, Pennsylvania. You've been in Congress for a number of terms now, and you have consistently voted against increasing DHS funding for the southern border. How can you now hold Secretary Mayorkas responsible for not having the funds needed to do his job? Follow up to that, you misspoke earlier. You said CBP-1 was created by Biden. It launched on October 20th, 2020, prior to the 2020 elections. That was President Trump's administration.
So the CBP-1 app was supposed to be used by Border Patrol, not for people to come across the border illegally. So if I misspoke on the exact date, I apologize that, and I accept the correction. Regarding my votes for Customs and Border Protection, I would completely disagree with your assessment. As a matter of fact, just this summer, I voted for the Customs and Border Protection, or the Homeland Security Appropriations Bill. But Richard, what I want to make sure that you know is that I'm not going to vote for more money for Customs and Border Protection to be used to bring more efficiently into our country people that are coming illegally. So I don't want the money to be used to house illegal foreign nationals. I don't want it to be used to give them cell phones. I don't want it to be used in any fashion to make that process easier, including sending them into the interior of our country on the backs of taxpayer money. And my assessment has been that for the past 3 years, that's the bulk of where that money would be used for. And since I've been to the border on numerous occasions, I have noted, and I think that it's widely known, or if it isn't, it should be, that most of our Border Patrol agents in critical sectors like Eagle Pass, Texas, are not on the border making sure that people don't come across. What they are is they're making sure that people are greeted when they come across the border illegally, and disturbingly, many of them, because when I'm at the border, I visit the processing facilities, they're not out on the line protecting American citizens and property or our country. They're in the processing facilities processing people that have come into the country illegally. That's not what we hired them to do. It's border protection, not the welcome mat for illegal foreign nationals. But that explains my vote, and I do appreciate your question. Hey, while you're finishing up on that poll regarding whether the president, well, you know what I asked, whether you thought that the president was adequately addressing the crisis at the southern border, I have another poll question that you can answer, and I'd love to hear from you on this. Have your energy costs gone up in the last year? Press 1 for yes and 2 for no. All right. I would like to go to the next question. Is Margus in Carlisle on the line? If you are, what's your question?
Yes. I wanted to know if you supported funding Ukraine against Russia.
So in the past, I have supported it. I don't agree with what President Putin has done. I don't agree with him generally speaking, because I think he's a totalitarian with communist-leaning tendencies. But that aside, the invasion of another country, certainly Ukraine, who was peaceful and had no interest in any kind of military conflict with Russia, I don't agree with any of that. However, I have since then had too many questions to support just an open and blank and wide open checkbook to go to Ukraine. We have pointedly asked the administration how the money would be used and how the end goal would be reached and what that end goal would be. And I would say this as well, Margus, that while we have a wide open border, it is, to me, disrespectful to expect the American taxpayers to pay for border control in Ukraine, which is part of what the recent or the proposed package would go to pay for. Not only that, government services, pensions, and so on and so forth. If we're talking about lethal aid and only lethal aid to stop Russia's incursion into Ukraine, I think that's a conversation that we should all have, and we should all debate the merits as well as the eventual outcome of that. But while we're $34 trillion in debt, heading for 35, asking the taxpayers to send more money to Ukraine without any outcome is something that I think is irresponsible and disrespectful. So I'm going to look at every proposal that comes. I understand that there may be another one coming soon, and I will judge that on the merits based on the amount of it, what's it used for, and what the end of what we're looking for, how we gauge success. Maybe that's the best way to put it, or how we gauge victory. Margus, thank you for the call. I want to turn the next question will be Thomas in Dauphin. What is your question, Thomas?
I just want to know why we're spending all this money for nothing. Of course, we've been doing it for years, but it's got to stop, man. You're spending.
So, Thomas, yeah, can you be more specific? Is Thomas still there? Okay, I don't hear Thomas, and I guess the general question is why we're spending all this money. That's what I did here, and I can't be more specific than that. We all understand that prices go up and that the cost of things go up. We deal with that in our families. But I would tell Thomas that I have been a champion and a fighter for trying to reduce the expenditures at the government level, because I think there is a fair amount of fraud and waste, just plain waste. And I think that some programs might not be effective anymore, might not be necessary. And I also will say this, while well-meaning and well-intended, I think some programs simply don't fall into the purview of the federal government. They might be great local programs, they might be great state programs, and very worthy. But when it comes to the federal government, we're supposed to be very limited on what constitutes a federal requirement. And if something is parochial to one town in one state, you got to ask yourself the question, why does everybody else have to pay for that? And so without seeing a nexus to the rest of the country and the taxpayers in it, that's always a question that I think that we should be asking, and that I do ask. Thomas, I hope that answers your question. But look, if you got cut off and I didn't answer your question adequately, or that I didn't answer it based on what your question was, I want you to email me if you can with your question. All right. So, Thomas, thank you. I'm going to turn to Scott in New Cumberland. What's your question?
Yeah, I'm kind of worried about Biden's executive orders that he keeps running. I know they need some kind of outlet on some things, but his taxation without representation, it seems like lately. I don't feel like paying for all these illegal aliens. I don't feel I should have to with my retirement. And that was one of his last. Is there any way you guys can low down on him? I mean, he just signed, I heard he had another executive order about the Second Amendment. Where the hell's our representation in this kind of stuff?
Well, Scott, there have been abuses on both sides of the aisle, in my opinion, on executive orders. And that's not how we want to see things done. I understand that he is the chief executive and receive votes to be the chief executive. We understand that. We also understand the lawmaking process and the legislative process. And of course, I think it would be better. And I think that it would be, you hear all arguments and you consider all potential consequences of anything that would have the force of law, which is what an executive order does, just like a law, just like one of these agency rules. And so I think it's best if we minimize the executive orders and maximize the amount of work that the legislature does, where we hear all sides, take a vote, and pass something, and work with the Senate, that type of thing, and then get a presidential signature, knowing that most things aren't going to be perfect, but that we can do good things for the country. But I think it's been done obviously on both sides of the political spectrum. A lot of people don't like it, no matter which one's doing it, and some only like it when their guy's doing it, or don't like it when their gal's doing it, that kind of thing. So that's to be expected as well. I am concerned, however, when constitutional authorities are more concerned. I'm concerned about all of them, but I'm more concerned when constitutional authorities are potentially breached. There's an executive order, I think it's 12333 we call it, which essentially allows the executive branch to spy unimpeded on American citizens. So I don't like that one, regardless of who's in office. It seems to me that what was just done on the student loan defies the Supreme Court decision and is tantamount to a violation there, and using executive privilege to do that. And of course, anytime an executive order would be used to thwart the Constitution and constitutional rights, I disagree with that. The Congress is limited on what we can do in those cases. I think the one thing that we can do, and it takes a bit of time, Scott, is to not allow the funding for those kind of things. But it does take us some time to move that, and it's always kind of after the fact. So we can maybe anticipate an executive order, but Congress is usually busy trying to deal with the issues of the day, and so we usually would wait until after an executive order. If we disagreed, then we decide whether we wanted to fund that or not. But that takes a long, long time, and in the meantime, people feel like they're misrepresented or underrepresented. I think the best case scenario is that we have chief executives on both sides of the aisle that exercise restraint, try to use the legislative process, and try and minimize executive orders. And that's quite honestly for both sides. Scott, thank you for the question. Again, dial or press *3 to ask a question and get in the queue. I want to turn to Sandy in Dillsburg. What is your question?
Well, hi, Scott. I actually have two questions. The first one is dealing with the border bill. I understand that it's for Israel and Ukraine and for the border. My question is, well, what about the other countries? Are they not helping for these causes? And why are we the only one that seems like we're throwing out all this money when we really should be concentrating on the border? And my second question is, do you think that the Republican can nominate Trump when it comes to the convention this summer? Because I really feel that he has a great chance, but he has all this other stuff that's going on for him, and I'm just wondering what your feelings are about that.
All right, Sandy, let me start with your first question first. So you talked about the border, but then you also talked about what we characterize as a supplemental. So the House sent over a border bill, which I characterized, which is known as H.R. 2. We did that earlier last year. That sits in the Senate. The Senate responded recently within the last 2 months by adding their border, what they characterized as their border package, to what we call a supplemental. So we have regular spending that we deal with in Congress is essentially supposed to take the balance of the year to deal with the most important thing we do, which is determine our budget and determine how to spend your money. That's the normal course of Congress. But over the past 10, 20 years, there's been after that a supplemental offered, and that's additional spending that either the Congress wants or the president wants or what have you. A recent supplemental included Ukraine funding for Israel, funding for Taiwan, funding for Gaza, and yes, as I understand it, funding for border security. And that, I think, was about $116 billion. That one was the one that had the border security language, so-called, attached to it. But it's also the language that I characterized earlier as enshrining in law, letting 5,000 people come across the border illegally each day before we were actually motivated or empowered to do anything about it. So I didn't really see that as a border security bill. Now, that's a supplemental. They have since that one didn't make it out of the Senate, they've come up with another supplemental, which is less money. It includes, as I understand it, Ukraine, Israel, Taiwan, and money for Gaza. There might be some other ancillary things that I'm not aware of in there. And that's less money. That's the supplemental that they're talking about moving now and sending over to the House and try to get that passed. I will tell you that my problem, first off, with all these things is that they're not paid for. We're either borrowing this money to pay for other countries' security, or we're literally printing it, which makes all your costs at home more, number one. And number two, sooner or later, you got to pay this bill back. We're either borrowing it from China or borrowing it from ourselves. When I say borrowing it from ourselves, issuing treasury bonds and borrowing it from the United States that way. But we are, again, $34 trillion in debt, headed to $35 trillion. And I need to know what the mission is. And number one, for things like Ukraine. And number two, I think it's important that we pay for these things. The House did pass and send to the Senate, Sandy, about 2 months ago, an Israel supplemental, but it was paid for. I think it was about $14 billion, and we took money, unused money, out of this IRS expansion fund to pay for that. And that's choosing your priorities, which is why you elect members of Congress to make an informed decision about what our priorities should be. And we sent that over, and the Senate has done nothing with that. Regarding the nomination, I don't like to get into partisan politics too much on these. This is an official congressional teletown hall call. But I will tell you this: each party has their own system of conventions and delegates. As you see, that's happening now in the primaries. That is the nominating process. Former President Trump is leading in on the Republican ticket in that process, and I suspect that if all things runs its course by the time that the convention is held later this summer, that he will receive the majority of the delegate votes to become the nominee for the presidency. That's my expectation, and that's what it looks like. I hate to predict, but I think that's where where it's headed right now, and I surely hope that answers your question, Sandy. Again, press *3 to ask a question. I want to remind everybody, I did say to contact me via email, but I failed to give the address. So the address is Perry, Perry, .house.gov. And you can go to that website and then click in the upper right where it says contact me, or you can always call, which might be faster and easier, 202-225-5836. So the website is perry.house.gov. The phone number is 202-225-5836. I'd like to turn now to Bill in Dauphin. Bill, what is your question? Are you there, Bill?
My question was about, it's already been talked about actually a couple times. It was about Ukraine, and I just wanted to comment that I think it's time for Europe to step up and take the bulk of this fight. It's their backyard, and when we've got a trouble here with our border, and I never hear of anybody in Europe wanting to send us money to help us. Nobody ever wants to help us. It's always we got to go and save these other people. And so, like I said, you already talked about both of those things a bit. So I guess I just wanted to put those comments in. Thank you.
Well, Bill, I sure appreciate it. And let me just add a couple more points that you brought up there. I have been on record of saying that Europe should step up more. Like I said, if we're talking about lethal aid to Ukraine, I think many Americans understand that. I think that is a worthy debate and discussion. I'm not saying that I would agree or disagree at the end of the debate, but asking Americans to pay for the pensions of the Ukrainian government workers and actually pay for the functioning of their government when we're this far in debt and our border is wide open, I think is a tall, quite honestly, I think it's just plain disrespectful, to be quite honest with you. And furthermore, so I have said that Europe should be more involved, and then we hear recently that more of the countries in Europe aren't meeting their NATO North Atlantic Treaty Organization goals. So they're asking us to spend more of our hard-earned tax dollars in Ukraine. Meanwhile, they're not even meeting their goals for their own self-defense. And it seems to me that Ukraine is their direct neighbor. They have the most to lose, and they should step up. They should be handling the lion's share of this. America can certainly be a leader in many respects, but they should be handling the lion's share of this, and America can help out. But we simply can't afford to, quite honestly. And then finally, what also adds insult to injury, since you brought it up, Bill, no one talking in Europe about our border. We pay the United Nations. We are the largest benefactor to the United Nations, who then pays non-governmental organizations to bring people into our country illegally. I just think that's a slap in the face to not only the rule of law in the United States of America and to people that come here legally and stand in line and pay the bills and take the tests and so on and so forth, but to the American taxpayer that is asked to shoulder that and then have it used to a purpose that most Americans would not agree with. So thank you very much for the question. I want to turn now to Sarah in York. What is your question?
Yes, hi. Thank you for having this town hall, and I want to thank you for your service. My husband is a retired Marine Corps combat veteran. He's also 100% disabled, and as of recently, the VA has declined to allow him to receive necessary surgeries within the community, which we heard from a direct VA doctor that a year ago this would have been absolutely possible, but because of all the migrant issues and the border funding and the this, that, they have pulled the funding from veterans like himself, retired 20 years of service to this nation, and they're giving it to migrants now. Are you aware of this, and what are you going to do to stop this?
Sarah, I have heard that claim, and we've tried to validate that claim, but I will tell you, I have not been able to. So I don't want to say that that's happening or not happening because I haven't been able to confirm that, and I don't want to disparage any of the administrations or organizations working on behalf of taxpayers or veterans. But I do want to say this. If you do have an issue with the VA, it's a primary job of your congressional office. I ask you to call in. We would like to follow up with you, but if somehow we get disconnected, I want you to call that number 202-225-5836. And I would also ask you, Sarah, if we could, during that conversation, I would like to have a conversation with the practitioner at the VA that told you that story, because what we're doing to verify that claim, and I've heard it on numerous occasions, numerous outlets, what we've done is gone to the VA to verify the claim. Now, I hate to say it, but sometimes agencies don't always give you all the information. And I said, I don't want to speak out of turn here, but if that is happening, I got to tell you, I'm going to be as livid as anybody about that. And as a person who has served as well, the people that have worn the uniform and borne the battle and have suffered for that need to be the primary focus of our Veterans Administration, and the thought of any of those resources going to people that are here illegally, if that can be confirmed, I think is going to cause quite the stir, as it should in Washington, D.C., and we will be demanding accountability and an understanding of how those things could occur if they have. So I want to be very clear about that, Sarah. I have not been able to confirm that, though, but thank you for bringing it up because I have heard of those claims. Thanks again. Again, dial star 3 to get in the queue. I want to turn to Lon in Mechanicsburg. What is your question, Lon?
Hi. Thank you for allowing me to speak. My question was specifically, multiple times you have mentioned that the spending needs to be brought down at the federal level. As you mentioned, our debt is getting ridiculous. But I was wondering, what areas specifically do you feel that we could cut spending?
Well, Lon, thank you for the question, and I think that's a reasonable question. We all have to make very difficult decisions, every member of Congress. So there are what we call 12 separate appropriations bills. I'll give you a couple examples. DOD, or Department of Defense Appropriations, is one of the 12, or Transportation, Housing, and Urban Development would be another. And there are 12 separate bills. We look at the programs in those bills, and we're supposed to judge whether they are on track, whether they need more money, whether they're too much money. I will tell you, as a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee, I look very particularly at how we're spending money overseas. And if I see wasteful programs overseas, I'm going to be very vocal about that bill in particular, as well on things like the transportation, housing, and urban development. Lon, I will tell you, I have a disagreement with using your tax money to build out electric vehicle charging stations. If you want to have an electric vehicle, I think that should be your choice. But we didn't pay for, through forced taxation, the gas station network across the country. That was private industry that paid for that, and it seemed to work pretty well. I understand that the government, maybe that's a term. I should change that term. the current administration wants to jumpstart the infrastructure for electric vehicle charging. I understand they want to do that. I just don't think that the taxpayers, excuse me, should be forced to pay for that at exorbitant numbers, especially when there's no accountability to the other side of the equation, when we're literally shutting down power generation stations in the country. At the same time, we're demanding that more and more people use electricity via electric vehicles or home heat or what have you. It seems like a policy, well, it is a policy that's working at odds with itself and the American taxpayer. And so I look at things like that and say, where is our authority to force you to pay for these things which you may never be using? You might never want an electric vehicle. And at the rate we're going right now, look, right now, there's a power generation plant in Maryland that has signaled it's going to shut down. And we use a thing called the PJM, the Pennsylvania, Jersey, Maryland Interconnect, that schedules all the power from these different power companies to make sure that our grid is reliable. And the PJM has told the company that owns that power producing station, you cannot shut down. And they have made a contractual agreement with an environmental organization who's willing to pay them more to shut the facility down than to generate power. And the result is that now we're supposed to accept more power lines across Pennsylvania to deal with Maryland's shrinking power availability. So there are cases like this where I don't think that the federal government needs to be involved and that we don't need to spend that money. I will tell you that in the negotiations with Speaker McCarthy, we said that pre-COVID, we were spending the level of money that it was. It was still way too much, but we wanted to, as much as possible, go back to pre-COVID spending levels for last year's budget. So understand, we were spending $7.2 trillion and taking in $4 trillion. Part of the agreement was to spend $7.1 trillion. Now, that's still a far cry from a balanced budget at $4 trillion, but we were able to get the agreement from McCarthy, and we were able to get many of the bills written to that new number. And those were bills that I was willing to vote for, not just vote on, but vote for. But then that whole deal was scuttled, and now we're going to spend even more money than that on this occasion. I just don't think we can keep doing it, and we need to look at all these programs very critically and decide which one's our priority and get something closer to the amount of revenue we're taking in, or agree that we must tax everybody at literally almost double the rate they're currently being taxed at the federal level, because we're spending almost double that amount. So that's where I stand on that, Lon. Thank you very much for the question. Again, dial *3 to get in the queue. Nzinga is in Harrisburg. What is your question?
Yes. Hi, Scott. Thank you so much for having this. This is very good. It's nice to talk to you. I have a question. I actually have two questions. My first one is, I'm a master herbalist, and I think it's very important that we have options as far as our medicine is concerned. I'd like to know how could we go about, if we work together, on bringing better quality medicine into Pennsylvania, especially herbal medicine, given our people options in the state. But I also am concerned, which is my second question, about the farmlands here. There's a lot of foreign companies coming into Pennsylvania, buying up a lot of our farmlands, a lot of our lands, our properties, and I'm concerned about how that's going to affect Pennsylvanians as far as having healthy foods to eat and having food that they're eating from our state instead of having to import other foods from other states or countries because our lands are being bought up by foreigners. How can we prevent that, and how can we promote more of our Pennsylvanians to create farms here, especially organic farms and natural food farms, so that can help our people to become more healthier in this state, because we have a big problem with health in Pennsylvania. So how can you and I or you create a program so that we can incorporate without, issues to incorporate natural foods and medicines throughout our state?
Nzinga, great question. Thank you. Let me delve into the first part the medicines part, I will tell you this. I think that there has been a chilling effect since the pandemic on folks that want to practice holistic medicine, whether you're a practitioner or whether you're a person that wants to take care of your health in that space. And I look at what happened during the pandemic when different prescribers, these are people with, their medical doctors prescribe certain things and were censored or were threatened by the different parts of the medical community, the apparatus for those things. And we had never seen anything like that in the United States of America. Understand that, and it was something that I wasn't so familiar with because I never really had to deal with it on that scale, that doctors and practitioners often prescribe off-label, so to speak, for different symptoms, because that's oftentimes you see maybe a certain medication will handle a certain symptom, but it's not associated with the particular malady that the practitioner is dealing with at that time. And that's oftentimes how we find out as the medical community and citizens, we didn't realize that medication that's already been out there and already been tested will work on this issue. But I will tell you, Nzinga, I think that unfortunately over time, the pharmaceutical industry has really cornered the market on this stuff, and they don't want us trying things that have been known or tried and true, because they want to repatent or patent new stuff and then charge for it. Now, I'm not saying that all the pharmaceutical folks are bad actors, but I would also say this. I think we really have to take a look at the immunity that the pharmaceutical companies have regarding vaccines. If people are harmed by vaccines, they ought to be able to seek accountability and redress for that. And it's an issue that I think had good intentions when it was originally derived, but as often is the case, it has been mismanaged and abused over the course of time. And now people don't have any recourse when things go wrong for them. And so, and then finally, I just think that we all want to be living healthier and eating healthier. And I think that promoting those kind of not only medications, but nutritions is good for all of us, and not to have a chilling effect on those that want to seek it or those that want to practice. We should be able to have the medical freedom, I'm going to use that terminology, the medical freedom in this country to take care of our adult bodies the way that we see fit. And regarding the farmland being bought by foreigners, I don't necessarily just have a problem with foreigners buying farmland or anything else in this country. I think we're an open country. We want to be able to allow private property to exchange hands with people in this country. And if that includes people outside this country that want to invest in the greatness of America, I don't have a problem with that. What I do take issue with is countries that are enemies of the United States, or at least aggressive to the United States, and don't have our best interests in mind. And I'm going to point out one country of interest in this regard that I take issue with, and that is China. I do not want members of the Chinese Communist Party buying up large swaths of farmland, and quite honestly, any land, especially when it's associated with national security concerns. We've heard time and time again where the members of the Chinese government, which is essentially the Chinese Communist Party, or their agents, and I need to say that because sometimes it's not overt. They'll use some Chinese company that is separated, has some degree of separation from directly being run by the Chinese Communist Party, to buy land close to these facilities. I think that in the case of countries like China, we ought to have a direct reciprocity program. If China won't let America buy land, farmland, or land close to their military or sensitive installations, then we should not let China do the same thing for us. And I know that there's a bill that's circulating around Congress. I think it's Representative Newhouse from, I think, the state of Washington. I've asked him what the future of that bill is. I hope it comes to the floor. It might not be perfect, But that is something that I'm interested in, and I agree with you. The only disagreement I might have with you, Nzinga, is it's not just Pennsylvania. It's all across our country. And so we need the options, but we need to safeguard not only our food supply, but our national security, and we can't be ceding that or selling that to countries or individuals or companies that are averse to the United States of America. Thank you very much for the question. I want to turn now to Victor in Camp Hill. Victor, what is your question?
Hi, Congressman Perry. Thanks for taking my call. So I got two questions. One is these organizations that are organizing the immigrants to come in, that's the head of the snake. They're so organized today now that they're actually functioning better than a lot of our big businesses. And I would think that we have legislation on the books now, like under RICO, since they're practicing illegal activities to bring these people in, why are we not even having discussions on bringing these people to, holding them responsible? So that's question number one. I guess my next comment is that at what point is the call for the money we're spending in Ukraine? Because Russia, in my opinion, is going to take it. We've lost Ukraine, and the Russians have lost about 500,000 people, I think, and we're just playing both sides of that, like in Israel, funding Israel and then funding Gaza. We're playing both sides, which makes me think that we're not that interested in solving the problem. So, and for a comment, I'll be voting for Trump whether he's on the ticket or not. So those are the questions I have.
Okay, Victor. Thank you very much for the question and the comment. I'll start with using RICO and other things regarding people that are aiding and assisting what I would call the lawless or the unlawful entry into the United States. As you probably have noticed, Victor, and maybe others have, maybe others haven't, the immigration constitutionally, and I'm a firm believer in the Constitution, is the purview, it is the responsibility, the authority for immigration policy and enforcement resides with the federal government. The federal government is either willfully or just either willfully not faithfully executing the law, or they're just incompetent at doing it at this point. That's just it's one of those two things, or a combination of the two. And the states that are most affected, all states are affected, including Pennsylvania, but the states that are probably most affected are these border states. And in the cases where they have said we cannot tolerate it anymore, and we have a duty to stand for the rights of our citizens, they have tried to enforce some of the federal statutes. But as you probably know, Victor, and if folks don't know this, the federal government has sued these states over and over and over again. And as a matter of fact, I think Texas is involved in a lawsuit with the federal government right now, where Texas has tried to enforce the federal law because the federal government won't do it. I guess the short answer is, Victor, is that I think state attorneys general are reluctant to do it because I think that they've seen the pattern and know, especially at the current time, it will be a waste of their effort and time to try to do that, because it is strictly within the purview of the federal government to do that, whether it wants to or not. And then I do want to make a comment about, some of these folks helping these folks across the border. Victor, you might not know this. I think the policy dates back to the Carter administration, but many of these NGOs are organizations that are familiar to us in our communities. There are a lot of religious institutions that are involved in this, and the faiths are right in your community. I don't want to name any of them because I don't want to disparage them, but they, in my opinion, are involved in, unfortunately, the largest human trafficking scheme or operation in the course of human history, unfortunately. And I'm sure they don't want to think of it that way, and I'm sure that they want to think that they're helping people and doing the right thing. But running these people up through the cartels that control the border, And that's not just me saying that. That's the chief of Border Patrol saying that the cartels are the ones that have operational control of the United States-Mexico border. These people are placed into indentured servitude. They suffer hardships on the way that, quite honestly, are generally unspeakable in many cases and can be the products of modern-day slavery, not to mention the assistance of things like organized crime, gangs, and deadly drugs pouring into our country at unprecedented rates. So I do think it's the purview of the federal government, and I do agree with you, Victor, that the United States Attorney General should be looking at RICO charges in regard to this lawlessness for these organizations. And then let me just, because we have talked about Ukraine and Russia a lot tonight, but I just want to add this other comment because you brought it up, and I have been on record as saying this too. We are on both sides of this war. We're on both sides, just like we're on both sides of Israel and what's happening in Gaza. I think that the United States needs to pick a side and be for that side and stand for the right thing, not disrespect the world and not disrespect our citizens. And we can get into more of that, especially with Israel and Gaza and Iran's involvement there and how the United States is playing on both sides of that equation and has been for some time. But for right now, I want to go to, Victor, thank you. I want to go to Mary in Dover. Mary, what is your question?
Hi, Scott. Thank you for taking my question. I'm wondering about the use of executive orders by the president. I'm particularly concerned about the student loan situation where he has defied the Supreme Court ruling that stated that he does not have the authority to forgive student loans. So can you give us a little bit of definition of when it is appropriate for the president to use an executive order? And if indeed, are there any circumstances where he would be barred from using executive orders? For instance, in the case of student loans where the Supreme Court said that it is unconstitutional for him to do this.
So, Mary, it's a great question, and I guess the answer generally is that we expect the president to, and all members, to follow the Constitution and the constitutional guidelines. When there is a question of constitutionality, as in the student loan program, so described by the president and executed by the president, then the courts will step in if somebody raises a claim, right? Somebody has to say, well, this isn't right, and take it to court. The court won't just take it up because they have an opinion on it. Somebody has to bring that process to bear. And that's the only way to find out if an executive order is constitutional or not, other than hoping that each president will stick to and abide by the Constitution. As to when an executive order is in order or is necessary, maybe that's the better way to put it. It's my opinion that all presidents should limit them to emergency circumstances to the extent that they can. I'm sure that the executive gets frustrated. They want to do more, and they're hamstrung by the legislative process and the time it takes or what have you. But our government was set up that way for a reason. We're supposed to move methodically and thoughtfully and not just move quickly because that's what we want. But presidents on both sides of the aisle have done that. That's just the fact of the matter. Regarding this particular event or issue, my understanding, and you know, I'm going to have to look further into today's events on these student loans. But the last one, a bill or a law that was used for 9/11 service members was used by President Biden last time to essentially approve student loan forgiveness for a wide swath of people that weren't included in that original legislation, that law, which is likely why the Supreme Court said it's unconstitutional. But I think what we're going to find is that the president said, okay, well, if I can't use that law and I can't do it that way, I will just do it another way. And it's likely to receive a Supreme Court, or maybe not a Supreme Court, but a court challenge anyhow. But that all takes time. And of course, you can't go to court until the damage is inflicted. And so now that the damage, so to speak, has been done, I imagine that someone is going to say, look, this is unequal treatment under the law. The provisions that were used were unconstitutional, and then it will go to court, and the court will have to decide. My concern, among other things, Mary, is that in the time it takes for the court to decide that, much of the money will be gone, and it is very, very difficult after the fact to get it back, and likely it is gone forever now. And the people that don't have a college degree are now forced to pay for ones that do, and that's simply just unfair. But that's the reality of executive orders right now. So, where do we stand here? Do we have another call available?
We are done.
Oh, okay. Well, that went fast. Well, thanks everybody for joining. I wasn't prepared. I thought we had some time to go here. Look, I just want to remind you to press *6 to sign up for the newsletter. I also share legislative updates on the website, which is perry.house.gov, and on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Rumble, True Social. I'm at Rep. Scott Perry on all those social media platforms. Connect with me to see legislative work and updates. State of the Union is in a few weeks. And I just want to remind everybody again of that website. Or if you were held in the queue and I didn't get to you, certainly visit perry.house.gov, send an email, or call 202-225-5836. All right? We want to answer every single one of your questions, but I know the hour goes fast. So thank you for your time this evening, and please stay safe out there. I wish you all the best. God bless you.